Good evening. I'm Rebecca Klassen, Curator of Material Culture at the New York Historical. Tonight, I look forward to speaking with you all about our exhibition, The Year of Flaco, on view through July 6th. But first, I would like to thank our trustees, our Chairs Council, and all of our members and other generous donors. Your support allows the New York Historical to continue to pursue our mission. Our program will last approximately 45 minutes, including 15 minutes for your questions and answers, your questions and my answers at the end, which you can submit at any point via the Q&A function on your Zoom screen. We have disabled the chat function, so please do make sure to use Q&A. After the presentation, we'll get to as many questions as time allows. Could I get the first slide, please? So Flaco's story permeated New York's outlets and social media from the night of his escape from Central Park Zoo on February 2nd, 2023, to his death on February 23rd, 2024, which was due to a combination of rat poisons, pigeon herpes virus, and falling from or flying into a building. And more recently, his story has reemerged as we collectively look back 1 year later with this exhibition and the several books and other initiatives that have been generated around the city and beyond. So some days, some moments, I'm sort of baffled by the fact that I curated an exhibition about a single bird, an owl. But this single bird managed to capture the imaginations of so many. Flaco's story dovetailed with popular ideas of the New York experience and the people who come to thrive in the urban jungle through determination and resilience and grit. He also raised interesting philosophical and ethical debates that are not easily resolved. So this photo, very sweet photo by Jacqueline Emery showing Flaco at a handball court, encapsulates, I think, some of the ways that Flaco's story bridges nature and culture and has us consider what is urban and what is wild. And then the complex and often thorny relationship between humans and other animal species. This single bird truly became a New York folk hero, a really potent and flexible symbol for our human experiences, the challenges we face and our aspirations. And he helped people connect to a sense of the spiritual, like the greater good, and really like pure magic. On the other hand, Flaco was an owl with owl thoughts and instincts that are separate from humans. So with this exhibition, I try to hold in balance the multiple and very passionate perspectives on Flaco, while also highlighting the fact that he deeply touched people's hearts and gave them joy. Could I get the next line, please? So Flaco's year starts with a bang, it's a crime story. So on February 2nd, 2023, a vandal cut open the steel mesh of his enclosure in Central Park Zoo, and he was soon discovered on Fifth Avenue and East 60th Street, his orange eyes and expressive ear tufts really making an impression in this rather astonishing photo by Benny Polacek. So he was standing at over 2 feet, so he's tall, with an impressive wingspan of over 6 feet, but he was a poor flyer. Having spent all 13 years of his life in captivity in a limited enclosure, it was kind of a miracle that he wasn't hit by a car as he's journeyed over from the zoo. Um, Cops set out a pet carrier, which you can see behind him in the photo, but he didn't get in. Wildlife rehabbers have said that, had someone with expertise been present, they would have tossed a blanket or a jacket over the owl's head. So his story has this immediate interest as this tale of an escaped zoo animal, a Eurasian eagle owl, which is an apex predator native to Europe and Asia, even though Flaco himself hatched in an avian park in North Carolina. So he was a US-born bird while being a foreign bird. Could I get the next slide, please? So the exhibition includes 31 photographs by 9 photographers arranged chronologically to convey a timeline of the year of Flaco. I wanted us to see the seasons change, with bare trees becoming flush with green and then the air turning crisp again. And it would be punctuated by Flaco's milestones and be guided by the typology of Flaco imagery established by his many photographers. And I also wanted to include images that I was just simply moved by aesthetically. So the first grouping focuses on Flaco's first month outside the zoo and gives a sense of his progression in skill and comfort, which perhaps seems rather rapid, which is great. On the left, the photo by Anke Froelich from his first morning outside the zoo shows him not quite knowing where to perch and being confounded by strong winds that morning. And then in the middle image by David Lay, we have visual proof of the first time that Flaco successfully captures live prey. So that's a reassurance that he could, take care of himself, but also discouraging from the standpoint of the zoo's, repeated attempts to recapture Flaco, as he would be less enticed by prey that was placed inside traps. So, and then on the photo on the right, also by David, we see him gloriously unfurl his wings in a pose popularly known as the DeLorean, after the 1980s sports car with distinctive doors, featured in Back to the Future, the film. Um, so David and Jacqueline Emery, whose photo we saw in the first slide, were among the few people who dedicated themselves to finding and observing and photographing Flaco. I don't think I told them this, but one of the first things I did to get a handle on this month by month chronology was to methodically sift through their Instagram accounts. But their book, Finding Flaco, was eventually quite helpful to the development of the show, as was another book on Flaco by Jonathan Hollingsworth. Could I get the next slide, please? David and Jackie also introduced me very helpfully to a few organizations and researchers they had contacted in their pursuit of their own sort of quest to discover more about Eurasian eagle owls. And just to quickly acknowledge a couple of individuals, Carla Blom, Executive Director of the International Owl Center in Houston, Minnesota, helped me understand some of the issues surrounding owls in captivity, as well as the sometimes dangerous behaviors that owls that have imprinted on humans can sometimes reveal when they're released. And Marianne Salvelsberg, seen here, helping to band a wild Eurasian eagle owlet, like a little mini Flaco, is a former classical musician who studies the vocalizations of Eurasian eagle owls in a quarry near Maastricht in the Netherlands. And a key point from my exchanges with Marion is that, like in the US, wild owls in Europe face many dangers caused by humans that limit their lifespans, such as rat poisons and collisions with vehicles. Can I get the next slide, please? Luckily, outside of captivity, Flaco learned to navigate his new environment without creating too much disruption. He provided birders with a front seat view of his novel experiences, like the other animals that he encountered for the first time, as seen in these photographs by Paul Bebor, who is a lifelong photographer who was living near Central Park. So the image on the right shows Flaco being mobbed by American robins, which are alarmed and calling attention to the presence of this bird of prey. Can I get the next slide, please? I love these action shots by Christopher Eng. So on the left, we can appreciate the mottled and barred wings, this beautiful coloration. And then on the right, we see a blue jay that's dive bombing Flaco in an attempt to get this predator to skedaddle. So Christopher's story is super interesting. He was a stressed out executive some years ago at a multinational corporation before his wife convinced him to go on a safari in Tanzania, and that changed his life. He turned to wildlife photography and became a passionate advocate for conservation. But it wasn't until the pandemic that he leaned into the wildlife of his backyard, Central Park. He said that when Flaco escaped, he selfishly realized that it gave him the opportunity to photograph a Eurasian eagle owl in the wild without having to travel. So I thought that made a lot of sense. Can I get the next slide, please? And New York City is incredible for birding. We're looking forward to spring migration just around the corner. There are over 300 species that can be seen here, and we have a large and passionate birding community. And we're also a global media capital where stories get made. So when it comes to the phenomenon of celebrity birds, and Flaco was most certainly one, New York seems to be very good at minting them. Who could forget Pale Mail, who made his Manhattan debut in 1991. And for over 3 decades, New Yorkers delighted in spotting him, canoodling with a succession of mates on facades of buildings around Central Park. Um, and social media has really accelerated this minting of celebrities. The Mandarin duck, a non-native bird that most likely escaped from private ownership, made a huge splash in 2018 with his flashy, colorful plumage. In large part this was due to the Manhattan Bird Alert Twitter account run by the birder David Barrett. Um, Less controversial was the beloved Barry the Barred owl, who really charmed pandemic birders from fall 2020 until her death from rodenticide and collision with a park maintenance truck the next summer. Very sad. But Central Park would be visited by a snowy owl that winter. And we also had Geraldine, a great horned owl that some romantically inclined Flaco fans hoped that they would meet. But that would have led to a hybrid in the wild. And also, as Marianne Savelsberg later determined by analyzing audio recordings, Geraldine was actually a Gerald, so no babies. But some say that, all this kind of paparazzi behavior, paparazzi crowds, and unethical sort of behaviors can stress these celebrities. So, for instance, disrupting the birds by getting very close to them, or trying to attract them, or otherwise modify their behavior. Um, and some in this camp also tend to feel that charismatic species can detract from the appreciation of more common ones. But then, on the other hand, others believe that these celebrities can help people develop an affinity for birds and an interest in conservation. Can I get the next slide, please? So Flaco's photographers took many images of the owl with his prey, with decapitated and eviscerated rats, or rats' tails sticking out of the beak as he like gulped it down. But anticipating that there might be children visiting the exhibition, I chose to not include some of these gorier images. So, for instance, David Lay's photograph of Flaco capturing prey for the first time doesn't really show blood. It's just the rodent dangling from Flaco's beak. But in the exhibition, I thought it was important to convey a little bit more about owl behaviors, as well as Flaco's favorite hunting spots. So the photograph by David in the bottom left shows Flaco doing what's called mantling. So after catching prey, owls and other raptors will sometimes cover it with their wings and tail to prevent other animals from stealing it. And this photo, interesting, looks like it might have been taken during the day or using flash, but amazingly, it is a nighttime photo taken with a long exposure and the light of a nearby lamppost. So incredibly, it's very clear. But there were two hunting areas that photographers particularly noted, both of which were in the northern part of the park. The photo on the top left by David and the one on the right by Cheryl Checkman were both taken at the compost heap, a spot that had been used by owls like Geraldine, the snowy owl, and other owls that have come through the park. And Flaco also frequented the Harlem Mirror construction site quite a bit. And he was really fond of hanging out on construction equipment. Can I get the next slide, please? For many birders, early morning is the time to head out, but owling has a nighttime orientation. And these photographs by Anke Fröhlich really capture that sense of nocturnal quietude. Anka's father had introduced her to birding at age 6 in her native Germany. She moved to New York in the mid 90s, and while she thought the local birds were cool, it wasn't until the pandemic that she really picked it up again, and she dove right into photography. And she became fascinated with owls, beginning with Barry, and taught herself owl photography at night. Um, so the image on the left shows Flaco on Bridge 28, which is a cast iron Gothic Revival bridge. And Anka framed Flaco beautifully in this ornamented guardrail. Um, and on the right, we see Flaco on a park bench, and it really gives you a sense of scale, like relative to humans. You could picture, where your head might be if you were to sit down and sort of imagine Flaco's size relative to your head. Next slide, please. So in the fall, Eurasian eagle owls begin to expand their territories, and that's what Flaco did, even though he was an ocean away from the majority of his kind. Those people tracking him last spotted him in Central Park on October 31st, 2023, and didn't locate him until November 6th when they found him on the in the Lower East Side. I love the photo on the upper left that shows him, outside of a co-op, and you can just such a it's just such a typical sort of building, and you can imagine maybe yourself being in that building. Um, But he traveled to the East Village, but he wasn't really a downtown guy for that long, and he hightailed it back up to the Upper East and West Sides. And in this kind of part of the story, he becomes an owl of rooftops and water towers and fire escapes and windowsills, and his persistent hoots projected across the neighborhoods. And he makes surprise visits to people outside their homes, sometimes communing with these apartment dwellers for hours, blinking his orange eyes. It's so remarkable. Can I get the next slide, please? So Marian DeMarco, who took these photographs, is a filmmaker and wildlife photographer who had, you know, captured Flaco following his escape. Um, and over time, his presence in the park became more or less quotidian for her until, one day in early January 2024, she found a large feather outside her building and wondered if it was his. Then, about a month later, a neighbor spotted him on a fire escape in the courtyard of their building. And Flaco spent about 2 weeks at her building. And so in the photo on the left, Marianne used an infrared flash so as to not disturb Flaco while he was preening and stretching. And I think this image encapsulates what Marianne described as a sense of Flaco being, she said, so impressive, but he's so goofy. Um, and also, what's incredible about Marianne's experience is that residents in her apartment complex, previously strangers, banded together around Flaco, texting each other on his whereabouts. And for the photo on the right, Marianne is actually sitting in her neighbor's bedroom, and in the foreground, you can see her neighbor's cat named Indy. So it's this very New York story of proximity and fortuitousness. Can I get the next slides, please? New York story being about community as well and people gathering. So in this slide, so it was incredible that, Flaco lived for so long, and it was expected, but still tragic that his life would be cut short. On February 23rd, 2024, Flaco's body was discovered in a courtyard of an Upper West Side apartment building, actually not far from where Marianne was living. And he was quickly taken to the Wild Bird Fund, which is a wildlife rehab center on Columbus Avenue and 87th Street. that last year alone saw nearly 13,000 patients, including Flaco, from over 200 species. So it's a remarkable effort that they undertake every year, day after day. Um, and this exhibition, the Year of Flaco, really attempts to mirror and amplify what community members reported to me, which was that Flaco, though he belonged to a non-native species, really sparked a greater interest in birds and awareness of the dangers that they face. So every year in the United States, over 1 billion birds die from glass collisions, an estimated 250,000 of which are in New York City. So it's astronomical numbers. And indeed, the vast majority of patients at the Wild Bird Fund are have collided with glass. So we explore this aspect of Flaco's legacy in which, existing legislative efforts were given a tremendous push due to this greater awareness. So, for instance, the Lights Out Coalition, whose protest sign we see here on the right, has been working to advance three bills called Flaco's Laws in the New York City Council. They address light pollution, which disorients migrating birds, as well as bird-friendly window retrofits, as well as alternatives to rat poisons. So this protest sign uses a 2021 photo by Project Safe Flight volunteer Melissa Breyer, who found 269 dead birds at the World Trade Center on 1 September morning. And then the text panels in the exhibition provide URLs to web resources at local organizations like the Wild Bird Fund and the NYC Bird Alliance so that people can dig deeper to take action. Can I get the next slide, please? And so what were those bird-friendly window retrofits? Well, the exhibition includes examples. The NYC Bird Alliance has been a prominent advocate for bird-friendly building materials and has worked with developers and building owners on finding solutions. So for instance, they worked with closely with the Javits Convention Center, which at one point was a major killer of birds. And its renovation in 2013 replaced the windows with fritted glass, which is essentially glass that is pattern printed with ceramic. And that reduced bird deaths by over 90%. So after visiting the Bird Alliance's materials library to look at different types of bird-friendly glass and retrofit applications, I was inspired to include these touchable examples of window retrofits in the exhibition. So we see them on the bottom left there. Just so people can know what we're talking about. Retrofits, it sounds a bit abstract. So these samples manufactured by Feather Friendly are vinyl dots on the left sample and vinyl strips on the right that are applied to the exterior surface in 2-inch intervals so that in theory, the smallest bird can perceive that there's something in the way. And but a bird-friendly retrofit could be as simple as a bug screen. Could I get the next slide, please? Flaco died, as I mentioned before, with 4 different anticoagulant rat poisons in his system. So rat poisons build up in the body and don't result in the immediate death of the target species, but rather a slow death due to hemorrhaging. So these toxic substances can lead to secondary poisoning, killing and harming living things beyond rats and mice, and they can spread throughout the food web. A 2022 study by Cornell determined that 68% of the state's red-tailed hawks have anticoagulants in their systems. And then, so in selecting an image to illustrate the issue in the exhibition, I went with this Starve a Rat Today public health campaign button and volunteer ribbon that we see on the left, which dates to the late 1960s or early 1970s and is from our collection. And I tied it to a brief discussion of New York's long history with the brown rat and efforts to control their populations by basically dealing with our trash problem, And I also wanted to keep the imagery relatively upbeat for this inspiring story about Flaco. But in a different context, such as the one we find ourselves in tonight, I think it's more useful to show a picture of what rat bait stations look like because I see them everywhere in the city, and I actually did not know what they looked like before embarking on this exhibition project. Um, and in the image on the top right, which I took yesterday, it shows it really just shows poison being used as a band-aid while neglecting the underlying issue, which is trash. Like the bag of dog poop, which is essentially rat food. So there's a lot we can do to tackle the issue of rat overpopulation without resorting to poisons. Next slide, please. And so in addition to looking at Flaco's year and the issues birds face in the urban environment, the Year of Flaco includes roughly 70 memorial items left at the base of Flaco's favorite oak tree in Central Park. Indeed, this collection is truly the genesis and the heart of this exhibition. Um, what are we looking at? So in addition to bouquets of flowers, mourners left cards, letters, drawings, photographs, stuffed animals, owl figurines, and so many more types of objects. And then across 3 weeks that this memorial was active, a small community group that dubbed themselves Friends of Flaco really carefully tended to these items. They'd monitor the weather alerts for inclement weather and go out and retrieve them and bring them inside and then take things back out again. And one of these memorial tenders, Valerie Hartman, reached out to the New York Historical asking if we wanted to preserve them for future generations to learn about Flaco and what he meant to New Yorkers. Can I get the next slide, please? And truly, it was the letters that convinced me to take on this project. The one on the left reads, "Fearless, magnificent Flaco, you brought me so much joy and touched my heart. The first time I saw you in the North Woods last February, I could have watched you for hours and hours. You were so brave, so regal, so smart, so beautiful. I was going through my own changes, recovering from cancer and feeling the limits of life. And there you were, proving that we can all rise above the challenges that come our way and be a symbol of hope and inspiration for others." And then the illustrated card on the right reads, "Flaco, seeing your journey as a free bird was a bright spot in a part of my life where I struggled to find joy. You brought people together and you gave us something special to look forward to." So, though Flaco was an owl, his admirers really kind of saw in him a parable or symbol about or a narrative about human potential in which one can overcome the constraints and challenges and confront the unknown, and really discover your inborn powers and really soar. Um, Also, for some, encountering Flaco represented the restorative and the healing aspects of nature, as well as the sublime and the majestic. So, and also there was a interesting way in which there was a connection to death and mortality. Owls are very potent symbols in myths and legends. So people who experienced Flaco visiting their apartment buildings, some of them had the feeling that he was linked to loved ones who had passed away. So Flaco's impact on people was truly profound. Can I get the next slide, please? Visitors have come looking for their memorial objects. The card on the left was by Brian Cook, who connected with Flaco's story as he put it, a fellow transplant trying to survive in the city. He hadn't intended to leave anything at the tree, but he was so moved by the speeches and the poems that were being read at the memorial event that he sat down and drew this offering. And then Deborah Jaffe, the birder and ceramicist who made this mug, didn't leave it at the tree. Rather, it was the legendary literary critic Michiko Kakutani, who had penned two articles about Flaco for the New York Times, Michiko had shared her photographs of Flaco with Deborah so that she could add them to her ceramics, which often feature animal imagery, and then left one of her own examples. Could I get the next slide, please? The visitor comment book, which has the prompt, "What does Flaco mean to you?" I think is quickly becoming my favorite object in the exhibition. It's turning into its own sort of memorial with people writing messages to Flaco and to each other and reading, it's people are enjoying reading messages from New Yorkers. Um, some highlights, Flaco, you added a little bit of magic to the city during a difficult time. Soar, you beautiful creature. Someone else says, "Flaco united people, a welcome distraction from our divisive world. May his spirit remain." And then this message from a young person, "Dear Flaco, I hope you had a good life and thank you for being a good owl in Central Park. And you brought people together, so thank you for that also." I love that. Can I get the next slide, please? So speaking of good owls in Central Park, for the Audubon's Birds of America Focus Gallery that is physically adjacent to the Year of Flaco, my colleague Wendy Ikemoto has curated two special rotations featuring owl species that are endemic to New York and that we are so lucky to have sometimes as our neighbors in the park. As some of you may know, one of the New York Historical's treasures is the collection of all 435 preparatory watercolors for John James Audubon's Birds of America, as well as a rare double elephant folio. So in this installation view of the rotation that's currently up, we see the folio open to the great horned owl and its original preparatory watercolor hanging above it. And then on the wall to the right are watercolors for the eastern screech owl and the barred owl. And visitors can also listen to recordings of all of these species calls. And then on April 18th, a few weeks from now, a second rotation will go on view and will feature the snowy owl, among other species. Could I get the next slide, please? So before I respond to any questions you may have, I wanted to close with this evocative photo by Paul Bebor, who took a series of photos from his rooftop, his own rooftop on West 86th Street of Flaco hooting from a nearby water tower. And then the lights of the planes flying into Newark really just kind of streak in the background and highlight Flaco's presence really rather magically. And he appears as if he is like the spirit of Gotham posted up above in this iconic cityscape. Okay, so I'll see if you're, oh, somebody says that's our building. Okay, let me know. Please feel free to send in your questions using the Q&A function. Okay, well, it doesn't look like anyone has any questions. I hope it was because I was thorough. Um, oh wait. Okay, so somebody asks, are many buildings utilizing the new glass options to protect birds? Well, the NYC Bird Alliance was instrumental in passing local law, I think it's 15. Please don't skewer me if I got that wrong. But and that calls for bird-friendly building materials in new construction and significant renovations. So that was passed in 2019 and enacted in 2020 and effective in 2021, I believe. So many of the buildings that you will see around the city, if they are doing things right and not seeking loopholes, have bird-friendly glass. For instance, at the Natural History Museum across the street from where I am sitting right now, the new wing does have ceramic frit in the pattern of dots. So what is my favorite part of the exhibit? Somebody asks. That is well, I did mention the visitor comment book, which in a way is, I don't know if it's cheating because it's part of the, it's being created as visitors come through. But I would say there's a compilation of 14 different video clips from about six different contributors. And I include them on a monitor right in the middle of all of the memorial objects. I thought it was important to see Flaco is a moving, living bird, and not just something that existed in still imagery. And also, I love the audio of New Yorkers at the base of whatever tree he was roosting in or perched in, and their conversation. It's like water cooler talk at the for New Yorkers connecting around seeing this wonderful bird, or children seeing an owl for the first time and learning about learning tips on birding from more experienced older folks. So that that sense of New York as a living entity is something that I really enjoy. Um, okay, where is Flaco's body? And that's, I think, the last question that I have. Well, after his death, there was a necropsy that was performed, and it was as you can imagine, quite extensive, especially because of the negative effects of pigeon herpes virus and four different rat poisons. He's had extensive internal bleeding. So what exists are his wings and a DNA sample that are currently with the Natural History Museum. They have had a long-standing relationship with the Central Park Zoo, or the zoo system in New York, really that dates back in the 19th century, obtaining samples from all sorts of animals, from elephants onward. So Flaco is in good company. Um, well, I thank you all for attending tonight. Um, Thank you so much for your participation, as well as your really exceptional support of the New York Historical. And we hope you can join us at the museum to view this special exhibition before it closes on July 6th. Thank you so much and have a good evening. Bye.